and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I'm doing an interview today. I'm sitting down with Miss Kitten. She's been with me before. We've had a really fascinating discussion on a very big part of her life inside of the kink community to which she contributes, takes part of, teaches, expands on, shares her art. Today, we're sitting down and talking about consent, a conversation that's consistently ongoing inside of the community just because we need to understand how multifaceted consent is, how deep each level goes, where we need to be inside of the world of consent. And it's led to us to kind of an interesting discussion when we get into, because there is no central authority to kink, we don't report to a kink government, we don't have a kink governing body to really settle disputes. Kink in and of itself really becomes a self-regulating model. And if it's a self-regulating model, it revolves around certain principalities of self-awareness, communication, effort, negotiated boundaries. Practitioners can often find themselves engaging in kink activities that provide this structured framework potentially for themselves as they explore their desires and limits and their boundaries of their own sexual prowess. And the inherent power dynamics that are along the way in role play scenarios allow certain individuals to express themselves authentically while adhering to mutually agreed upon guidelines. And while that all sounds good and fine, we have to understand that without self regulation, this is not only a means of personal empowerment, but it's a way to navigate the serious complexities and desires and intimacy within inside of the consensual context of the BDSM lifestyle. So I want to, like I said, Miss Kitten is here today. She's taken some time out of her really busy schedule, doing things again down in South Africa. And she and I are going to really sit down today and discuss consent more along this and some of the personal autonomy we need to go through actually coming into the lifestyle when we're talking about effort and what we really need to do, especially if you're new. Even if you're seasoned, sometimes it's great to revisit these things. So without further ado, I want to introduce Miss Kitten. Thank you again for joining me on the show today to talk about a really passionate subject for yourself.
Hi, Chris. Just thank you first for having me on your show again and for listening to my voice. And I think consent is one of my kinks, actually, by this level, and how much time I spend talking about it and playing around with it and teaching it. I really believe it's the cornerstone of what separates our BDSM community from abuse. And I believe very strongly that making kink a self-regulating model is what separates BDSM from self-harm. So I'm going to sort of touch on that a little bit, and I get a bit preachy. So you're just going to have to tell me to stop when I get to that point.
No, that's okay. When you gave me some of these topics to think about, and that's kind of what I came up with when we're talking about self-regulation. Can you give me your side of what your views and thoughts are as maybe a small overview before we get into some of the consent framework here of what your kind of take is as far as kink being a self-regulated model?
So first of all, I think we have this enormous freedom on this really incredible platform, but it is a platform. And the advantage of showing up on a platform is you don't really have to do any work. You just kind of have to arrive. So this platform having sort of limitless possibilities means that we need to be responsible for how we show up in this platform and for ourselves in this platform, because without doing that, we're not showing up ethically for other people, especially based on what we're asking from other people when we're asking them to participate in a BDSM experience. And I think a lot of people show up on this very sexually open platform and put themselves forward for opportunistic abuse because they're not taking personal responsibility. A lot of people show up on this platform and they are putting themselves forward for self-harm because it's easy to get lost in the biochemistry that kink offers us as an escape instead of using it as a tool for empowerment. So this is like literally just my own take on kink, and there's no right or wrong. And I sound a bit preachy because I'm getting old and granny-ish, and it's a bit like late in the year for us. We've had a long season, so I can sound more fun if you give me a different topic like sharp things. But I think seriously we need to show up ethically if we want to find ethical players in kink. And I think to do that, and I think if we all did that on a platform like this, the platform would become self-regulating, and kink would be a self-regulating activity instead of something that needs so much governance, which is obviously missing, and we experience that on an international level. I don't think anybody can tell me that we're not lacking an accountability process or some form of governance to help us through the crises that we're experiencing. And I think a lot of those crises could be managed if we were managing ourselves better and we were showing up, consenting to ourselves first, and understanding consent as an actual word, because this word gets thrown around enormously. Like every book that you read that has the word BDSM in the next sentence has the word consent, but nobody ever breaks down the word consent and says, well, what does it actually mean? What does that mean to yourself? And then how do you look at that framework that makes up that word and make sure that it exists in your ongoing relationships in kink and in life? Because I think it's culture creates culture. So if you're not living it in your day-to-day life, it's very difficult to bring consent into your sex life, kink life.
No, I mean, what we're getting down to is personal responsibility, a lot of it, because I've coined this before as what I talk about is the baby bird syndrome. First, I think to further clarify a point, when you're talking about a platform, places like FetLife or Facebook or maybe even Discord servers or fetish.com, places like these that provide a conduit for learning. They are not learning platforms. I think I want to be more clear, at least in my take. My take is they're not learning platforms. If you really want to learn and grow in your community, hopefully you have one. That's where you start your training. That's where I started my training 25 years ago in Atlanta. Um, but they do provide a wonderful resource and a lot of potential knowledge building if you can get around um, a lot of the showmanship of the posts or grandstanding of a lot of things, and some of the other things that I have problems with inside of some of social media talking about. But I think when you're talking about what not understanding when we get into consent and why why do we speak about it so much, is it that we don't have enough of an understanding. When I look at consent, I kind of look at it as an acronym. It's a C is for communication, O ongoing, N is negotiation, S is for safety, enthusiastic for E, and again, no means no, and finally, you know, where do we actually end with it? It just
So
we
yours is
don't. Go ahead.
your definition is awesome. I haven't heard it broken down as an acronym like that before. So I love learning new things. So I can put that in
Well,
my
I'm
I keep it
sorry,
in
and I forgot the last one. T for transparency.
my
You know,
That's awesome. I'm gonna
I
make you send that to me because I love it.
I'm
But
going to now. I'm going to give you the clinical side of consent. Now, here comes a clinical definition for you: capacity, options, non coercive, shared decision making. Of course, ethical because it kind of no duress. And finally, a therapeutic alliance. That's how I look at consent. That's how I break down consent. I go down to the core of the word and I look further into it because it's part of my job. But I love this lifestyle and I love this community. I've been a part of it for a quarter of my well, half my life, not a quarter of my life, half my life. And I've wanted to make sure that I could learn and absorb as much as I can because I enjoy it. I genuinely enjoy looking at these things. But I think when there's a lot, when we're asking people to look at their own personal autonomy and start to learn, they may get lost. I will say it can get easy to get lost in the sea of available information on social media platforms such as Facebook or FetLife or fetish.com. I'm not attacking these places, by the way, because they do provide a conduit for information. But as you and I talked about before we started the show, it also provides the ability for a lot of disingenuous information to be put forth.
So
And I'm going to leave it in the phrasing as disingenuous.
I love listening. I love listening to like different ideas on a subject and hearing all these opinions. And I think the one thing that I really value from this community is the connection that we get, and the ability that I have to speak to this amazing stranger across the sea and get his feedback on a topic like consent. So I really I feel privileged to be able to share this with you like that. And I want to say, like, in my head, you're speaking from a very scientific process in consent. For me, kink is more, you've seen my work, you know that it's a feeling. So consent for me means to feel together. So when I do my negotiations, I've stopped using the word negotiation, because that in my vanilla life means I have to win something, and I am always in it to win it. I'm into the death. So I prefer consent collaboration instead of consent negotiation, because I think that we need to feel together. So if you go back to the etymology of the word, consent means to respect, to look again, and then to feel together for me. And I see my consent. I see everything in pictures. If you've seen my work, you'll understand what I mean
I
by
know you.
that.
For those who don't know, a lot of, not everything you do, but Miss Kitten has a huge, uh, uh, she's an aficionado of needle play. And for those who know me or those who have heard me talk, it's not overly big for me. But there was, at the beginning, and when we sat down this morning about an hour and a half ago, there was this photo she put up. And let me tell you all, you have to go and look at her gallery, and I will link her profile. The photos, it's art. And it was art that spoke to me on this particular photo of a woman who had needles with, it was a feather design in her back. It captivated me for so much. For 10 minutes while I had my morning coffee that one day, all I could do was sit and stare at this photo. And then I responded about how beautiful it is. And if anybody who knows me, I don't comment much on social media. And I commented on this photo.
Oh, I
And
feel
that
so
says a lot.
honored. But Chris, yeah, so even consent for me is a picture. And I think the easiest way that I've looked at consent is, so I have this picture of this house, and like my personal responsibility and everything fits into the house that I live in and the house that I'm building for myself, as far as kink goes. And I want a nice house. Like, I want to bring cool people around. It's got to have a big lounge, and it's got to have like nice place to hang out and stuff like that. So it's important that my house is solid, and that my foundations of this house are solid, and that I'm building these on a framework that's going to carry me through and that I can rely on, because I'm now going to add biochemistry and all the good feelings when sexy time happens, and when I stick 100 needles in people, and I need to know that I have a good framework to lean back on, that I can trust myself, so that I'm showing up ethically in this space. So when I look at my house has certain pillars, and you've mentioned a couple of them. Obviously, lot more than I mentioned, but I'm just going to mention four. And my four pillars, so I start with a base level. I start with a foundation of autonomy. I'm going to go through each of these in more detail. I'm just going to give you my little building of my house.
Absolutely. And I'd like to kind of maybe go one by one with each point, because I'd like to give at least a different side or perspective of it, if you
Yeah,
will.
100%. So I'm going to give you my little
You
house,
go
and then we can
first.
go.
You go
Yeah,
first, pick the word, and we'll
yeah, I'm
go
going to
there.
give you my little house, and then we can go through each one separately. I'll mention them again. So I
Sure.
have this foundation, this floor of autonomy, and then I have my walls that grow up, that support my house and support my roof, and that is capacity, information, affirmation, and boundaries. And then again, I have another level at the top, which is my roof, and that's autonomy again. So autonomy is my floor and my roof, my foundation and my ceiling in kink. Without, and in life, it's not just in kink, without having autonomy in a situation, I cannot consent. So, and a lot of things. So we can start chatting, I think, about autonomy first. I'll just give you my little feedback.
Sure.
Without having my own autonomy, without feeling free to be myself, without feeling free to ask for what I want, without feeling free to leave a situation and without feeling free to use my no, there's no fucking foundation in my house. We all know I'm sure we've all done enough Bible study a million years ago to know that you cannot build your house without a foundation. Foundation is critical. If I've got things that crack my foundation, like power imbalances or binary bias or whatever, that crack that foundation, that house will not stand up. So my first question in my consent framework when I come into this thing is, how much autonomy, how much inherent right do I have to decide what's best for my own body, mind, and spirit in this situation? And if I don't have that, I cannot consent. So I already know if I haven't ticked the box, yep, got a great foundation here, yep, got a great roof on my house. I cannot tick those boxes. I cannot be giving my consent to somebody. And then the person that I'm breaching consent with or creating a consent incident with, first of all, is myself, because I'm going against me, and that's toxic for me. So I
Sure.
know that through many years of life experience. We learn this as we go, but without autonomy, I cannot be in the relationship. And I think this gets to really tricky, especially in a dynamic. But number one, I've got to show up ethically, being able to say yes and being able to say no, because I know what's right for my body, my mind, and my spirit in the situation. If I cannot do that, if I feel pressured in any way, I'm not in the right situation. So autonomy, my little baseline. Now you can hammer my autonomy model.
No, no, no.
Be nice
I'm
in the
not. I
house.
actually, to me, when I look at autonomy within the consent framework here, it underscores the importance of individuals having control over their own choices and actions. And in a place like the kink community here, this really does manifest as a commitment to respecting and upholding each other's personal agency. But that also means we got to hold ourselves accountable as well. And respect our own autonomy, because if we don't always respect ourselves, we're not going to respect anybody else. And this then leads to, obviously this is all being theoretical in a fabulous world, but then we'd be really looking at lifestylers or participants in the lifestyle can be encouraged to express those desires and set their boundaries, make decisions that truly align with their personal autonomy, and then ensure that these interactions are consensual and empowering for both parties. That you're right, that there is no pressure to it. So autonomy has a lot here, but I think that one thing that a lot of people don't even fully understand is their own personal autonomy, where they can say no, where they can say yes, when they can speak up. I talked about this the other day where, you know, even in me, I've been in a dynamic, an MS dynamic now. Well, actually, it's much more old school. I'm in an OP dynamic for those who know, but if not, it's closer to MS. But the reality is, we talk constantly. I get feedback. I want to hear desires. I want to hear what worked, what didn't work, what might change, or can I elevate it here? This brings another level of pain. All of these different things. I'm respecting her autonomy to talk to me. And from that, I'm making the scene better. I'm not making she's not topping from the bottom. She's giving me feedback to grow in my position and gives her feedback to grow in hers. And I think sometimes we get worried that, well, first, I think a lot of people don't understand their own personal autonomy, let alone respect others. And you're right, it becomes part of the stronger foundation. I don't know if this would be so much a roof as the ground floor.
Yeah,
To me, I would probably reverse it.
so for me, it's my foundation and it's my roof. So
Ah,
autonomy
okay.
comes in twice. So my little house is built with a foundation of autonomy and it's capped with a roof of autonomy. Because for me in kink, your kink identity does not remove your right to autonomy. You have to show up as two ethical human beings who can use their voice in a situation before you even get into a consented agreement and have a play. So it's really important for me that you show up as Chris and I show up as B, and we negotiate as two ethical human beings before you become a master and I become a kitten, and we have a great play. And I need to give you my answer as B, the human being, before I meow and squeak as a kitten, as we've consented to. I don't actually
It's not
meow.
really fair because you're putting a lot of ideas in my head,
Yeah, but
and
I don't really meow and squeak. So I know that sounds quite cool, but I don't think that's ever happened. But
no,
so your kink identity does not remove your right to autonomy. You may play with
absolutely.
somebody else and give them agency over yourself, but your right to define yourself, and how you want to live, and your right to leave situations must still be within you. Um,
Absolutely.
and
I want to
anybody who
then go ahead.
Sorry. My last on that is anybody that wants to convince you that you don't have autonomy, that you have no rights in the situation. That is not BSM. That is abuse, and I think that's so important. And I think often in these spaces, and I see it so much in my own community, women show up on these platforms, and these are awesome platforms, and they don't show up as themselves. They show up as their role, and already they've taken their autonomy away because a lot of those roles are submissive. I mean, just because I'm a kitten, I'm a feral cat with a lot of sharp claws. I'm pretty cool at looking after myself, but I don't negotiate as a kitten ever. I negotiate as one ethical human being who has a risk profile, who has a risk wallet, and who knows what they can spend, with another human being who can do that. And that's the type of player I'm looking for. I'm looking for a player who knows what their risk budget is, what they have to spend in the situation, and what the cost is to them personally, and is taking care of their personal costs coming into it. It's so
Sure.
important for me, and I think that's lacking a lot, is that the ethical start, because I often see these subs negotiating as submissives. You cannot negotiate as a submissive, and in fact, coming to me as a submissive without having negotiated that DS in our dynamic beforehand is unconsensual to me. I do not consent to being called mistress. I do not consent to calling you anything but Bob in this situation until we've had this conversation. Come to
Absolutely.
me, come to me with your autonomy. Own yourself in my space. I'll have so much respect for you. And I think that any decent dominant or any decent top will feel exactly the same way. And yeah, it's so super kinky and sexy to be called mistress, or for somebody to call me kitten, but it's even more super sexy when that is negotiated and you're doing it exactly the way I want you to do it. And that's what this is about. This is about getting what you fucking want out of this deal. This is not about pleasing somebody else or doing something as a favor. We're here because this is kinky and this is part of our sexy time, and we need to get what we want out of this. And the only way to do that is to show up with autonomy.
Well, that becomes interesting then, because then we're going to move into your second point here, and I'm going to lead with this, and I'm going to give you my version. And when we're talking about capacity, now capacity, in from my perspective here, really refers to someone's mental and emotional readiness to engage in an activity. It really does. Because in the context of kink here, recognizing and respecting somebody else's capacity is fundamental. So if they're not here, if they're not checked in, or if they're only checked in for me and not themselves, we can't engage. And we discuss that all the time. So we come back to this, the fundamental of open communication about our emotional states and our limits and the factors that might affect somebody's ability to fully engage in a scene. And I know there are a lot of reservations about giving out personal information, but it is pertinent. I want to know if somebody has a medical restriction or a health condition that might prohibit them from play, or they have a psychological condition that might prohibit them from play. Like, I'm not going to lock somebody in a closet and do a terror scene with them if if they're claustrophobic, but they want to do the scene, but they don't want to tell anybody. They've then removed my capacity to operate, and they're removing their own personal autonomy and capacity by not being disclosing everything. And this, if we look at it this way, or at least for me, when I look at it this way, we have to prioritize capacity, because when we do that, the community then responds in an environment where all of us practitioners can make the best and most informed decisions about the involvement of not only the participants we play with, but our participation.
I love that, and capacity is just, sometimes it's not an understood word. So like, I think we also learn to lie about capacity. I think we live in coercion culture where we are told that we don't ask for consent, we ask for permission. And when we get it, we do it. And people ask for your permission because that's the right thing to do. But we know that they don't want the answer, that any other answer but yes. So understanding our capacity becomes so important. And for me, this has been quite a journey. And the best way that I found to do this, and you don't all have to do this, but it works really well for me, so try it. And I'll give you treats if you do it. But it works really well is to put numbers on it, because if you say to me today, so Miss Kitten, how are you feeling? My instant reaction is, well, I'm fine. I don't want to frigging admit to anybody that I'm not
Ah,
fine. I don't want to
now
admit
I
that.
have to stop you there because as a therapist, when I hear the word fine from a client, I always tell people fine breaks down into the following. If you're fine, you're telling me you're freaked out, you're maybe feeling insecure, neurotic, or emotional. Fine isn't a word. It's an adjective to me that describes we're hiding something that's really bothering us.
100%, but how many times a day do we use it? And how many times, how many of us are happy to admit that we are not fine in a situation? We've been trained in the culture that we live in to always be fine, and we just have to cope. So how about, instead of giving it words which have different meaning to everybody else, we've structured it on a number system. So I work on a number system with my players,
Sure.
and I have a number for emotional, and a number for physical. And you know what? You can have a number for a million other things too, but these are the two main focuses for me. And we have a number out of 10. So today I'm going to check in with Chris here, and before I become kitten, and I'm going to say to him, B is probably a 6 out of 10 physically. I've had a bit of a rough time with a physical procedure. I'm going to finish it off tomorrow and we should be better, but it's been a very rough time for me. And emotionally, I'm probably a 7.5, which is not bad, but it's not my normal 8 out of 10. So two things become really important when we start to check in with this capacity is, number one, I have to be honest with myself. So I started checking with myself every day. Part of my journal is my own capacity numbers. When I work in big plays, when my team works together for a big play, everybody's checking in the week before. So we have a list of capacity numbers, and because I love spreadsheets, it's one of my kinks, I'll put them into a spreadsheet so I can calculate them. So I have an idea of where my whole team of 15 people who are going to be on a big play are all hanging about. I know who's crashing. I know who's normally what on a Monday. This helps me the Monday after the play know who's normally a 6 out of 10, or who's normally a 10 out of 10 and who's now become a 6 out of 10. I can also identify people who are not being honest with me through the capacity numbers, and they're often not being honest with themselves, and it's okay. This is not like I'm judging that, but I need to know that because I'm putting trust in you for the situation, and I need to know where you really are. So if you're checking in with me every day and you're telling me you're a 10 out of 10, that's physically impossible. That means you had enough sleep, enough food, you have enough money, your job is perfectly fine, you've got all your personal relationships are 100%. I don't believe that. I don't believe you can be 10 out of 10, 30 days a month. You're taking something, okay, or you're not being honest with yourself. So that for me already tells me that you don't have enough personal reflection to play in my space with me. I want your honesty. I want you to tell me you're a 6 out of 10, because then I can tailor the play in a better way. I can look at my team the day before and I can look at all the numbers and say, guys, are we really going to cope with this? Is this such a great idea? Are we all being honest? And if we're not all being honest, or we're not all at capacity to manage the play, if we're not all sitting at 7 out of 10, we shouldn't be playing. And it's not the Olympics. We can do this next weekend. Needles don't go off. They stay in a sterile packet. I can put them in you next weekend. We'll set it up again. But respecting that is so important. And it's even more important when you're playing in a space like this with biochemistry, where I'm now going to take your capacity from you. I'm going to fly you to the moon and back in the next hour. You're going to have the best frigging ride of your life. But I'm going to take all that biochemistry that you stockpiled for the next 10 days of your life, and I'm going to use it. So when you get this emotional sub drop, you need to have capacity to deal with that. If we started the play on and you were a 3 out of 10 and I flew you to the moon and back, trust me, Monday's going to be crap. Tuesday it's going to be even worse, and Wednesday you're going to be through the floor. That means I start affecting your real life. That means that I start affecting your ability to adult and your ability to be ethical in the rest of the world. And that's a problem for me. And that's not something that my risk profile says that I can do. So I need to know that you have the capacity to do this, that it's really something that you want to do, and that you can spend this time and this resource with me in this afternoon while we stick 100 needles in you and we have a fantastic play, and that on Monday you're still going to go to work. And my risk profile says I've got to go to work. So I don't have an option. I have to do this from an ethical point of view and say, do I actually have the capacity to play like this, or is this the wrong thing for me? And
But
when I'm looking,
what you're saying here, and that there's a driver, and I want to kind of get this point in there because I think it's important. And you said it, and instantly it's popped in this acronym of FOMO, fear of missing out. And this is why we lack information. This is why, which blends right into the next part. And I would actually see more so that you could take capacity and information and really kind of combine the two, because if we have the information being this cornerstone of informed consent king practices, then in theory, then we're encouraged to openly discuss and our expectations, our limits, our desires. Through that transparency, it ensures that all of us have a comprehensive understanding of these activities, and we reduce this likelihood of misunderstandings and unintended harm. But the problem is that we have at times the fear of missing out. You were just talking about, okay, I'll put my stuff away, that's fine. The needles, they haven't been opened. It's all still going to be sterile. It'll be next week. Now, I'm not even into it, but I can tell you it invoked for me quickly that feeling. Oh my God, she's putting her stuff away. I don't get to play now. I have to wait another week. You know what? I'm okay. I don't want to miss out on this week.
yeah, I think my kink's quite particular, so my needles would go away. Capacity is a big influencer in my kink. I'm really strict. You can ask the guys on my team if they don't check in, if they're checking in with fives 3 times during the week, I will call the play off. Um, I just won't do it. But I think we're dealing with quite a particular thing. So if I was using capacity in my more, I'm assuming he's not going to like me for this, but my more vanilla partner, my pony, who's an amazing pony, I do adore him. Um, he could look at it and go, okay, well, if my capacity is a 5 out of 10, we can still play, but we don't have to play at an extreme level. We can still have kinky time with a little bit of bondage and lots of cuddles and lots of treats, and we don't have to. It doesn't have to go to level extreme. So capacity can be used to then measure what type of play we're doing on the day. The example that I'm giving where I'd cancel the play, my stuff's big. We're doing low bass awards with high levels of sharps. It's important for me that my players are on the ball. I want them to enjoy the experience. I want the experience to be empowering for them. Taking it home into my he's really not going to love me for this, but my more vanilla kink life. Um, we can tailor the play differently because we have a different cubic depth of relationship in that play. So I don't think it's that it always has to be a complete stop, we'll call red, we're not going to do it. We can do something different, but maybe looking at what we've set out for the play isn't going to work in this situation. So if I look at the play that I've set out and say this is a 10 out of 10 capacity play, that's how I've got to show up for it. If I look at the play and say, well, this is a 6 out of 10 capacity play, and maybe that's a way to look at it in a more personal relationship where you're not doing such big art pieces and it's not such a big performance piece. Maybe the way to look at it is, what are the 3 options? What's the 5 out of 10 play? What's the 8 out of 10 play? What's the 10 out of 10 play? And then measure capacity during the week and pick one that works for you and your relationship, because you're obviously not all going to stick 200 needles in each other this weekend.
No, I mean, uh, it does. I mean, and then now it really does go into the next point. We're getting into boundaries and agreements, and we start looking at these things. I think a lot of it too, though, is how much we have to add in. Not because I want to get religious, but we actually have to add in the one word that might be missing in this entire equation of your framework, and that's faith. Faith in the fact that somebody's telling me the truth, faith that somebody's being honest, faith that they're discussing how they're feeling or what their physical state is, faith in the
Or
belief that everything they're telling me is correct.
I unfortunately my faith is very limited. I'm a very jaded kitty cat. I It takes me a long time, and I think I've had a recent personal example with this. A year ago, I started playing with my CBT bottom, who I'm now very honored to call my CBT slave. So shout out to Slave, you rock my world. But we started playing together a year ago, and we started everything with implicit consent, which means everything was explicit consent. Everything was written down, from the process to how many sharps, to how they were going to go in, to how long it was going to take, to absolutely everything was written down and recorded. We didn't step over the explicit consent guidelines. We didn't alter the plays. And we obviously always had the option to do less, which sometimes we did, but everything was by the book and negotiated in black and white. And the negotiations went forward and back, forward and back, forward and back. We recently did a celebratory play for his birthday, and it was the first time we'd stepped out of those boundaries of he knew exactly the number of sharps I was going to use. He didn't know how I was going to put them in. He didn't have all the details, but we had enough cubic depth in our container of a relationship that we trusted each other. We had faith in each other, but that faith's taken a year. It's taken a year. It's taken 11 big CBT plays to do together, and we had the most. I mean, the play was just frigging outstanding. I got to play with pain on a level because I trusted this individual so much. We shared such an authentic moment, and I was able to give him everything he wanted. He was giving me everything I wanted in the situation, and he's, bless him, he is the most divine human being, but he is gay, and I don't turn him on. It doesn't matter how beautiful my boobs are, but he had a hard on for me on the table through pain. So I was able to connect with him even on a slightly sexual level, not through sexual touch, but through pain. So I was actually able to elevate the pain to such a level that it was a sexual turn on for him, which it was dramatically amazing for me. I've got the hugest smile. My cheeks are actually hurting talking about it. But that took a year. So when we talk about faith, I believe fuck all in faith. We build our faith between our players, and that means we take things slowly. We take things with explicit consent in the beginning, and we work towards being able to trust each other because we've put the time in and we've backed up our words every single time. I don't believe in believing somebody's word. I believe their actions. It's taken a year for us to trust each other's actions, and I don't think you can rush the process. And when you don't rush the process, you're sharing that was bucket list. Like all my plays are bucket list, but this one is just, it was on a new level. I was actually able to tailor the pain through every needle into him. It was phenomenal. It was really, yeah. Still blushing about it. But, but yeah, so be careful with faith and don't jump in with blind faith.
Well,
This is
I'm not saying that we need to have blind faith, but we are putting faith in that people are telling us the truth, because we have to believe if we've built this relationship, that means even after a year. I'm not saying he wasn't honest in this particular. Let's just use this example as a way to build off of this. I'm not saying he wasn't excited and honest with you, but maybe on a subconscious level, on an unconscious level, he wasn't. And sometimes we don't know how to communicate that. So we're thinking we're feeling an 8 or a 9 and we're excited for the day, but in reality, we're far less from it. And that's the thing. We have to make sure at that point we've built up enough time, which is really why, like I push, we should be taking months to get to know somebody. A scene shouldn't be taking place in the first couple of weeks that you meet somebody. You couldn't have even created any foundation of trust. There is no capacity to work in. You've lost your personal autonomy because somebody's forcing something on you, one side or the other, or you're not even really taking you're not taking things seriously, and you're putting yourself in harm's way. And then we're discarding the boundaries that we set, which really, and I want to give you my take here on your boundaries and agreements. these, for me, besides your autonomy, really are another level to the foundation. For me, they would probably sit more as the roof line of our consensual interactions inside of the community. Because for us to engage in explicit any type of negotiation or deliberation or compromise, we have to clearly define what is acceptable, what's off limits. We have to talk about our boundaries. We have to negotiate our boundaries at times, and they may have to include specific activities or intensity levels, or whether or not we're going to use safe words or even have aftercare. And believe it or not, for all of you, before you hate on me, not every person does or wants aftercare. It is something that not everybody takes part in, and there's nothing wrong with that. So don't kink shame. Um,
But Chris,
but
I've got so much to burst in here, and I'm going to be a grumpy granny cat, and I'm going to go back to capacity because I think we before you get to the information and the agreements and boundaries, capacity already starts to talk about aftercare. So the first thing I want to say about capacity: if you are on substances, or you are drunk, or you are
oh yeah,
underage, you do not have capacity to consent. So it's the same as driving a car. If you can't get in your car and drive it, you can't get in the dungeon and kink it. It just doesn't work. So that was the one thing. And the second thing is, so capacity. You said, when we're honest with ourselves and we're a six, we can look at ways to help our capacity. And this is where self-care comes in. And this is where kink, this model becomes this part of this model becomes so important to me, because I look at capacity from the point of view, well, I'm a six today. How I want to play on the weekend. I super want to play. Don't want to miss out. I have FOMO worse than anybody else, in it to win it. How do I make sure that I'm going to be an eight? There are ways to do it. And I can go back to my self-care wheel. I have a really cute little color wheel, and it's all divided into pies. And on each of my little pies, I have a different thing, like running, riding, reading, relaxing in the bath, chatting to a friend, journaling, whatever it is. All my pies have different options for self-care. And I can pick a self-care option, and it's on the wall so I can see it, because when I'm low at capacity, I make crap choices. So it's better that the choice is in front of me in color. I pick my little choice for the day, and I make sure that I spend an hour doing that. I also recognizing that my capacity is a 6 out of 10. Make no big decisions. Do not say yes to anybody else. When I have labeled myself a 6 out of 10 at 8 in the morning, when somebody says to me, "Can you do this for me today?" I say to them, "Sorry, I can't say yes or no to that right now. You give me 24 hours, I'll get back to you. Can you contact me tomorrow?" And I move it so that I don't have to add to my day's capacity, because when I'm a 5 out of 10, I say fucking yes to everything and regret it for the rest of my life. So then I manage my vanilla life better. I put the self-care into it. As I put self-care into my routine, I'm already starting to understand what I need for aftercare. Because without me self-caring, I cannot fucking ask Chris to self-care the kitty when Kitty is finished playing. I can't ask him because I don't know what it is. So this self-care becomes hugely important in the regulating kink as a care model. You have to be able to know what you want. The only way you can know what you want and need is if you're doing it for yourself. There's no way I can come to you on a Monday after I've played with you on a Saturday and say, "Fix me." Okay, you're probably the one person I could, and you're probably the one person that could actually fix me because you're qualified to do it. But the rest of us don't have those options. So I need to know that I need rest, food, sleep, um, a run, a swim, whatever it is. But if I haven't used those things on myself and known how successful they are, how do I bring that to the table to even begin to negotiate aftercare? So self-care, aftercare, and capacity are all so linked for me. The more we can look after ourselves, the more we can be honest about our capacity, the more we're showing up ethically to begin the play, the easier it is for everybody, and the more this becomes self-regulating. I'm saying that word wrong, and I think I've said it wrong about 6 times. But anyway, I'm not going to dwell on that. I'm going to move on. The more we stop harming ourselves. I believe if you're showing up with a capacity of 4 out of 10 and you're asking somebody to inflict pain on you, you're not making a good choice. I know when I make choices and I'm a 4 out of 10, they're the wrong choices for me. And this is when this starts to border on self-harm, using somebody else to do it instead of being kink, even though you're consenting. You're setting somebody else up to do something for you that's not the right choice. So capacity for me, and I know know I used a lot of your time, and I keep coming back to it. But capacity for me is one of the this is the back wall of my house. This is going to stop the hurricane blowing through. If I can keep the bricks in this wall, to keep this wall standing, off my floor of autonomy and my roof of autonomy, my autonomy will stand on top. When my wall of capacity falls, my roof of autonomy falls too. So I know that this capacity for me is one of the biggest things. It might not be for everybody else, but for me this is huge. Now I will let you carry on. Grumpy cat is done.
No, no, it's okay. I mean, it's important to kind of to focus on these things and really kind of start building them out, because I think through each type of discussion, through your lens and my lens and all the other thousands of other voices out there that talk about what these things mean to themselves, it allows a third party or someone new coming in, or even somebody looking for a refresher, to listen and go, okay, well, you made really good points here, and you've made, oh, you know what, you talked about this, Chris, you talked about this, and Miss K talked about this, but they didn't mention this, and that gives them the ability to start looking into it. At least that would be my hope. I know a lot of people don't do that, and that's fine. I'm not putting you down for being lazy. I think laziness is a big problem in the lifestyle. That's a whole other Kink podcast. I'm not doing that today. But um, I do believe, like, with capacity, there's so much to understanding it. I mean, capacity itself is a charged word. Do I have the mental capacity today just to even get out of bed? Do I have the physical capacity to want to inflict pain or have pain inflicted upon me, or go through something intense like an interrogation scene or a humiliation scene? Do I have this capacity in me? Well, no, I've had a hard week. Guys quit at work, and I've had to work longer hours, or my boss yelled at me, or my girlfriend broke up with me, or my boyfriend broke up with me. All of these things come in as factors, and we don't sometimes, I think, take full stock.
Yeah, but I think that we, because of the coercion culture that we're living in, we are often compelled not to take stock and just to give permission. And I think that the more we can practice these skills and practice the skill of capacity in a normal environment, so doing it every day in your journal, when you wake up, just give yourself 2 numbers. What are my numbers today? Ah, that's what they are. And then being kinder to yourself about other people's asks when your numbers are low, and instead of just agreeing and giving permission to all these 100 things that people are asking of you, putting yourself first and saying, in your head, you can say, well, I don't fucking have capacity for you today. I'm going to tick you off to tomorrow. And you can very nicely say to the person, I can't give you an answer right now. Can you check back with me in 24 hours? And that gives you time to raise your capacity, have a think about the answer too, instead of just saying yes. But it starts to give you time to practice the idea that you don't always have to give permission immediately for something. And I think that understanding that you're only going to give permission for something when you have capacity to do it is a skill we need to practice daily.
Well, sure. I mean, I use what you're actually talking about here, and the first time we even spoke, what you were some of the things that you employ are some of the things that I use in therapy. There's the closest thing that I can think that comes to this is what we call SUDS, and this is a subjective units of disturbance scale. And what it's about is it's a self-reporting scale that we use to assess and monitor someone's distress experienced through individual responses to maybe a memory or a traumatic event. I'm checking anxiety levels. Um, I do this with clients when I'm working through trauma patterns with them. I'm monitoring. I get a baseline reading when they come to the session, so I know where they're at from 0 to 10. If they're sitting at a 2, they're it's kind of normal, casual. As we begin to progress, I check 2 or 3 more times to see where it's peaking at, and then we come towards the end of the session where we're winding it down, and then I'm checking again. This is something I employ. I started using this if I'm having an off day. It's first, how am I feeling? On this scale, okay, I'm sitting at about maybe about a 6. Something's bothering me. I'm not clear what. I'm not at a 5 where it's kind of maybe quasi normal. Something's up. I haven't figured it out yet. all right, at least now I've identified to myself there's something wrong. I don't know yet what it is. I'll figure it out. And then it comes to me. Um, and then, I kind of, I work through it. I'll talk to my partner about it, and then, I kind of, go from there. But it is difficult to sometimes want to, not so much to therapeutically analyze ourselves, but sometimes it's okay just to check in. And we have to remember that we have to check in. Because if we're not checking in with ourselves, how can we expect anybody else to do it? Because we have to know how we're feeling first.
Love that. I love that we have to check in with ourselves first, because how can we expect anybody else to do that? I can imagine RuPaul or somebody like that saying it. Like, it works for me in my head. Yeah, the capacity is a big thing. The more honest we can be, and the more self reflection we can take, and I think that's what I heard a lot in listening to you speak, is that you are you are being kind to yourself with the self reflection. Um, and I think in all of this, the more clear we are, the more kind we are. So we said, how do we trust? How do we trust other players? We need to trust ourselves, and to be able to trust ourselves, we need to be being clear, to be kind to other people, and clear. And then that brings me on to, which you've been trying to move me away from capacity forever, in the information side. And the information side, for me, this kink is a big game. This is like, it's like an extreme sport. Like, whatever level you do it on, you don't realize you're playing with biochemistry that makes you feel amazing, but then drops you on your head. So you need to have the information before sexy time starts. And the information means that you need to have actually tried it. You need to have picked it up. You need to have played with it. You need to have experienced it. You need to think about the before, the during, and the after in when you're talking about information. Um, and the more information that you can get, the better. And that information belongs to both parties to find. It's not one party's job to find the information. We are all responsible in this day and age. We all have Google. We all need to be finding out as much as we can and bringing this with to the collab, so that we can work together to find out every part of this. And I think there's another thing in this information thing that's becoming more and more apparent for me, is, what is the history in what I'm doing? Or am I appreciating something? Am I taking something from somewhere else and not giving it its and not giving credit to where it comes from? Has somebody else learned this lesson before me, and I'm just repeating history in a bad way? Like, I think there's a little bit more to the information side. And
Hmm.
as I'm growing in kink a little bit, I'm starting to see that, that
Hmm.
there's ways to take things and to use them in in a way to just get a thrill out of them, and there's ways to take them and respect them. So
Sure.
I'm really becoming more aware of my actions and where those actions come from, and a little bit of how they're passed down to me. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying be aware of the people who've walked before you, because they've obviously gone to the emergency ward before you, and they'll have a couple of stories. They're great people to contact.
Okay. Okay. I think I know where you're going with this. I
Yeah.
initially thought that I saw
Appre-
this post recently about cultural appropriation in kink. It was the last few months, and they said
I,
that
I,
there's
w- I was
specific.
going. I
Go
was
ahead.
going there. I was going there, and I do think that we need to be respectful about where stuff comes from. Um,
But I want to interject and give something on this side. So this actually will be up your alley. This particular post discussed hook pulling. All right. Now, they specifically stated, this particular group specifically stated, that it started with them. It didn't start anywhere else. It has no other origins but with them. This was a Native American group. Well, that categorically was undeniably the most false statement I've ever seen in my life. Why? Because this practice has gone back to Viking culture. It's gone back to Mesopotamia, which far predates any Native American cultures that we know of. Let alone, even if some of these cultures existed at the same time, there is no historical proof that there was ever any interaction. Yet they shared a similar practice thousands, tens of thousands of miles apart. Even in ancient parts of what is now known as India, they were doing forms of hook pulling. And that's just one example that I have. I understand that there is some things that we want to be cognizant of. and respectful of. And I'm fine for that. I think we are also falling, and this is where I tend to differ on these things. We start to defer or say, well, you can't do this because we did it and we're the only ones allowed to do it. Well, if you're going to do that, you shouldn't be wearing a blonde wig because certain people don't even have blonde hair in your culture. So that's cultural appropriation. You shouldn't be making Asian food because only Asian people should eat Asian.
100%. I'm not going to get into a cultural appropriation argument. I will tell you that this has been a, and I think you do know that this has been a big thing in my life. But I will tell you what my takeaway from these and my learning from the whole thing is. I think that respecting something's history is always a good start, and I think that there's an enormous amount of information to be gained from a source. In this
But
particular
I
case,
want to posit something to you on that. Let me posit this. So, this is philosophical and psychological. How can we prove definitively that any one of the practices that we get involved with originated with just one cultural group?
I 100% agree, and I think there are many sources. So I think this journey has given me a fascinating amount of research and fascinating amount of education in the beginning of S&M, and the playing with pain, and a spiritual journey related to pain. Like it's been like this rabbit hole that's been completely endless. And what it's done for me in my own kink is it's made me take a little bit of a step back, and instead of putting something on display for everybody else to see, it's made me appreciate the moment a little bit more. It's made me be a little bit more present and a little bit more um, connected in the actual piercing, and I found such pleasure from that. So the positives, I have no answer for the appropriation versus appreciation. I'm avoiding that like the plague, working around that completely, not going there, kitten face.
Yeah,
No,
I got some fire in my belly for that whole
grumpy cat
discussion.
face. No, not today, buddy. But it has given me this absolutely beautiful moment because I've been able to see um, past history where people have really found empowerment and release and joy and spiritual growth and personal growth from this experience. So being able to take that back and being able to I'm not copying their ritual. I'm not learning exactly their thing. I'm just trying to get feedback directly from the different sources, because there are many on this topic, not just one.
Sure.
um, and then trying to find a way to say, why am I doing this? So the question is more for me, am I doing this because I'm a white chick with a credit card and I can afford to do it? Or am I doing this because this is something that is really part of my journey and I'm really growing from? And I think that is the question that I'm asking myself more, because I think a lot of the time in life, I see shit that's cool and I want to do that shit. And am I doing this because it's cool shit, or am I doing this is because this is part of my journey? So I will tell you from my side, it is a natural evolution, to take the next sharp thing that I find and stick it into a person. I nearly said penis, but I didn't. I was good there. And hooks are just the natural evolution of that. Like that. It's so.
That's fine. You've got your hooks and needles. I've got my electricity, so I'm happy to jolt somebody with less than a half of an amp. I'm fine with that because that won't kill them. It'll sure make them
But
dance
but
funny though.
even the history of that is fascinating. Even the history of where those machines originated. I mean, I've got a little electric machine that is over 100 years old. That was one of those awful violet ones that was sold to correct hysteria. Is still
Hmm.
mentioned in the user model. But understanding the history of the machine, and then on that little journey, I understood the two different types of power, because I'm a chick. I never had to learn this in school, that there were two different types of power, that they had this little, like, who was going to get to which power struggle first. Like, it was really interesting. It gives my machine a whole different personality. It gives me using that machine a whole different respect for using that machine. And all I'm saying in the appreciation of the stuff, in the gathering of the information, is the more information that you can get, the deeper the cubic depth of the container becomes, becomes, the more appreciation you have for what you're doing, and then you can, then the action is more respectful, and then that is what I've taken from appropriation versus appreciation, that we need to deeply understand why we're
Sure.
doing it, ask ourselves, and we need to be able to appreciate the history of this really funny violet wand machine with 50 different attachments, one of them which could cure hysteria. Hasn't done yet. I'm
Well,
still
i-
mad. But
if we're going to tie this back to get us back on track, and I'll do that because I have a wonderful way of derailing conversations. If we're going to get this back into like where we were even with capacity, and I want to segue out of that because we could spend the rest of the show. We could probably even do another show on that alone. The reality is when you are talking about capacity, this is where this comes into. You have to be individually ready, capable, and engaging in with what you want to do. You cannot be a baby bird in this lifestyle. You can't be. You cannot expect to be spoon fed every safety protocol, every safety risk, every understanding, every operation, everything about pressure points. I have a book on my desk. I carry a book of anatomy. I'm not a doctor. Why do I have it? Because I want to understand about pressure points and where I can inflict pain that will not cause harm, that won't leave lasting scars, that will heal faster. So I've had to learn. My depth, my medical knowledge is nowhere. I don't claim to have any medical knowledge. It's very limited. But what it's done for me is it's taken me to a level in my play and in my scenes because I've shown up. I have the capacity to want to learn. I have the desire to want to learn. The information is there, and that's important for us to have. I have to know that I have had somebody's informed consent, that their capacity to play is ready, they're physically ready to go, and that they're now trusting in me that I have all the same things to take us into some sort of next level arrangement. But we're the component that I'm seeing a lot, especially in the digital age, versus if we go back 20 years in kink, if we go back 20 years in the lifestyle, we were forced to go to our communities and actually be a part of a community. And I'm going to argue something, a very big point. I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to do it anyways. I am going to argue FetLife or fetish.com, Facebook. These are not communities. These are social media websites. They help us attach to a community, but they are not a community in themselves as far as BDSM goes. They're not.
100%. I love that. I absolutely love that. For me, they're platforms. They
That's all they are.
require no work. They just require you to show up. They
Yep.
are, at the bad side of them is that they have 100 clicks. A click also requires no work. It just requires you to be mean to the person who's weakest in that group, and then you can have these fake friends. A community is something that requires work, and that's, I think, where the problem comes in. So for me, to get a relationship into any cubic depth, you need to start with the intimacy, and that means interacting on a personal level, one on one, getting to know the person, meeting up, attending munches, and that takes work. So you can arrive on a platform frigging easy, no work required. You can join a clique, also relatively easy. You just have to be slightly sharper witted than the weakest person in the group. But to create a community is work, and this is what it's about. This is the intimacy that we're requiring in kink. And I love what you said about that you had to show up because there was no internet, so you had to show up to learn from others, because we should be raising our tops above, and we should be encouraging them to keep learning, and we should be encouraging our newbies to go to them to learn. um, and we should be able to be calling each other out, in situations, and helping each other grow. And we're not doing that. We're sitting on a platform creating cliques where we're hammering each other, and half the people creating the cliques aren't even involved in the community. They're not even participating.
You know what? I have a lot to say on that. That's going to be for another show in a couple of months from now, probably in the new year. I'm going to get into discussing of lack of participation. We're basically a bystander. We're a spectator, telling the coach how to run the team. That's for another
Yeah.
time. I don't want to derail what we're talking about today because I can feel, if I'm checking in with myself, I can feel myself getting riled up about these because I'm
Okay.
passionate. Let me tell you where this comes from. I'm passionate about these subjects you talk about. I am passionate for my desire about the lifestyle. I am passionate when I go to a class, and I still go to classes. I don't care if you're 21 and you've got something new to show me about wrapping tinfoil around a nipple and how it's going to do heat connectivity. I want to learn. And I'm giving you a real life example, by the way. And it was a fascinating thing what they did with that, some cooking oil, and a touch of electricity. And my God, you should have seen me. I was like a kid in a candy store. 21-year-old engineer taught me this. It was
Oh,
interesting.
wow.
But barring all that, the bottom line is there's a difference between showing up and wanting to do the work and getting out there and saying, also we have to know our own hubris. I am humble. You know what? If you're 21, you got something to teach me, I'm going to listen. I'm going to be your biggest cheerleader. I'm going to appreciate everything you've done, and I'm going to say thank you. Just like I am going to be to the 70-year-old person who's been in the lifestyle since the inception of the coined phrase of BDSM, and they're going to be teaching me things about certain types of play or new or pressure points they did back in the day that have morphed into whatever they are today. I want to pay that respect and autonomy to everybody else. Now, I know our conversations got really derailed. I'm good at doing that.
Go for
I want to get
boundaries.
us I want to get us back to I want to kind of do at least finish up our boundaries here and maybe get into some binary bias and power dynamics. I know there's so much more. So what I'd like to offer to you to I know we're still in the show, but I'm going to say this. I'd like you to come back and do a part 2 to this because I think there's
Love.
just so much more to this.
Oh, you know that I love spending time with you. I'm
Oh,
so
I know.
keen. So I'd love to do that.
Good. So let's continue on here. I want to hammer out a couple more points because I know your time is valuable and it's much later for you. So let's do let's get into boundaries and agreements here. I know for you this is another cornerstone. Um, I want to give you my side and I want to get your take on this. And I mentioned this before. It really is this cornerstone when we're getting into the agreements of things we're doing between parties and boundaries. It becomes one of the pillars of our interactions and our community. And if we get involved in these negotiations and we define what's acceptable for us, well, if we start to define what's off limits for us, which can evolve over time, mine have changed. People I've interacted with changed or they've added new ones. These negotiated boundaries include all of these activities and these intensity levels. They use communication as a form to express our desires, our pleasures. God, the moans of pleasure, moans of happy pain, or even a red or a stop, and all of these things they're communicated to us because they're part of the agreement that we have because we've established and we respect these agreements. This is essential between a dynamic between two people, even if they're just topping and bonding or bottoming, that create this consensual space where we as individuals explore all of these erotic fantasies and desires with mutually agreed parameters. And if I can do that, even in the beginning, even if I want to learn, I want to go to my first rope class, even though I don't like rope. I'm not hating you, rope people. Just know I don't care for it. No matter how many people I have on the show, never going to convince me. Um, but if you're going to your first class, you can negotiate the boundary. You want to keep your clothes on, or you just want to maybe be tied on the floor. You don't want to be. You should, from what I understand, you should never be suspended in the first way or the first time anyway. But all of these things, it is about knowing yourself. And that's what I said to you before. We have to know and check in with ourselves. If I don't know how I'm feeling, how could I expect? If I'm coming to you and I don't know how I'm feeling, if Chris can't communicate to you and you're going to top me, this is a fantasy for everybody, for me, about what I'm about to say. This is total fantasy. Don't take it to heart. But if me as Chris was coming to you, Miss K, for a topping scene, you're topping me, which would never happen. It would be the coldest day in hell ever. Um,
Feeling the love.
I'm a sadist. I can't, I just can't. I can't bend the knee. It's not in me.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But if I don't know me, you're not going to know me.
and I'm not going to want to play with you because it's not going to be fun for me. And
No.
I'm not a kink dispenser, and I'm not there to go through your midlife crisis. I want to be present for the interaction. I really want to share this with you. But if you're not sharing yourself and you're not arriving authentically and you're not arriving ethically, how can you expect me to do that? So
Okay.
so
I want to pose then. I want to pose this to you as a real life scenario because so this happened to me, and this was
So
quite some
you want
time
to come
ago.
to me? You want to come to me for a session? The answer is yes, Chris. Yes.
N- Here's the scenario. So I had a submissive. I did a scene with at a dungeon. It was in a public play space. This is years and years ago when I lived in the States and in a certain part of the States. And because I don't want to mention where, I know people get funny about all that stuff. So anyway, at the end of the night, everything was fine. We go home, we're saying our goodbyes, and I noticed she was a little upset. She had seen it was happy and smiling all night. And then when we got home and she was saying, I'm like, well, what's wrong? Are you okay? Is there something happened? I'm kind of going into like reviewing my checklist. And she goes, I just want to tell you something. I lied. I wasn't ready. And I pushed and I did it for you. My heart sank. I said, I need, I can't have somebody who's not being honest with themselves to make me happy. And when that happened to me, I was still early in my kink learning enough. I mean, God, this goes back yeah, probably some good 15, 18 years. I didn't know how to. I went to my mentor and I'm like, well, did I violate consent? Am I going to be ostracized from the community? Because that really did happen back then.
Still
Um,
happens.
yeah. And what kind of, and then you said, well, we're going to have a conversation to everybody. And did you go to, and I went through all the protocols. I said I didn't do anything wrong. It was just that she didn't. Did you check in? I checked in. I asked all the things I could ask, but they lied to make me happy, and I didn't know how to deal with that then when I was younger as a dominant in that position. Now I don't really tolerate that. I'm like, you need to be honest because I want you to. It's not, this isn't just about my enjoyment. I know you want to deliver, it pleases you to please me, but I'm not pleased no matter how much I'm in a sadist capacity if you're lying to me. So how did
Yeah.
that suit for you?
Yeah, so I have a couple of questions in my consent collaboration, aptly named, so that I don't need to win the situation. And one of them is, what would I consider, what would you consider to be a consent violation, in the situation after the fact? So I find it quite an interesting question because if I answer it as a bottom, because I sometimes bottom, I do not submit, but I do bottom. I love pain. And for me, the two things that as a top and as a bottom that I will not tolerate, one of them is if my top uses substances and doesn't declare it before and give me the chance to call the interaction off before a play. So if I found out that you were drunk or stoned or had taken something before you played with me and you hadn't told me, that would be the end of our relationship. And I make that very clear up front. That's one of my non negotiables. That's a boundary I will not cross. I believe you have to be present. My other non negotiable is if you are lying to me about something and you tell me afterwards and you have done it deliberately, I find that malicious and I would also hold that against you. So that is actually in my negotiations and it's something that I state very clearly in front. And I also state that this is something, my intent in this play is that we both experience what we want out of it and we're both clear and truthful about what that intent is. So like if you're coming to the dungeon because you want to look at my boobs, which I don't blame you for, but that's not why I want you in my dungeon. I want you there so I can stick needles in you, and I want you to be there so that you can
No
get me
one would have any
sucking.
idea you loved your own boobs. I mean, I would be the
None, hey, none.
furthest thing from my mind.
Really.
I would say you have nice long hair. It's very shiny. Um, you do your makeup very well.
Oh, look
Uh,
at those. You haven't even
I
noticed my boobs. The
Nah,
75,000
not
pictures,
not at
like,
all.
no, not one.
Don't
Yeah,
even
yeah.
see those gigantic headlights at all.
So I think intent is so important, and I think that's why the relationship needs to be a little bit more of a cubic depth before you play, and that's why it's fine to go to a rope workshop. And by the way, I have the same feeling about rope. We have the best riggers in my community. They are amazing human beings. Yeah, I'm the same as you. Rope is just not my kink. I think I've been to some very expensive rope classes. I've been to some cheaper rope classes. I've been to some free rope classes. I still need to use Google to tie a single column tie knot. I just don't excel in it. It doesn't give me any passion. And I think electrical tape or a pair of cuffs does the same job just as quickly.
Of course it does. Even, what I've found is over electrical tape, I prefer zip ties and plastic tubing. It is just
Yeah.
amazing. I can get more creative and more. I'm not. Look, I don't want to hate on the rope people. I had Mr. Tinker Train on here, Brookish, Semawa Princess. I've had quite a few people, and I respect it. I think it's beautiful. But when you've taken 90,000 hours to do one scene in a weekend, and I'm like done, gone, left, and I'm already back home, it's not for me, and that's okay. And I make fun of it. Look, I make fun of it because I respect and love it, the community. If I didn't respect and love the community, I wouldn't make fun of it in the first place. So you can take that for what it is. But um,
Yeah,
yeah,
I feel you with all my heart. I have huge respect for these guys that can do it, but it's just not my kink. And I must say my riggers are a very important part of my team. And I absolutely admire and am privileged to be able to use them. But I'm never gonna do that. It's just it's just not for me.
no, no. Look, I
Okay.
want to I want to end today. I want to kind of end today, but there are a couple of points I'd like to maybe at least touch base on one, and we pick up again for a second part of this, which we will. We can start with the other, and then really continue because there's so much more in inside of this framework you've kind of created that you want to share here. I want to get into binary bias and some power dynamics here, and I'd really like to start with maybe your take. I want to give you my take on binary bias here and maybe understanding into a capacity. So when I look at this, I look at this as the acknowledgement here of binary bias and power dynamics can be a pivotal aspect in understanding and navigating the relationships or dynamics within inside of the community itself. And at its core, a binary bias refers to some oversimplification of power dynamics into some sort of dichotomy of positive versus negative. And then maybe in a kink context, this recognition challenges the traditional rigid perceptions of power exchange as inherently good or bad. But it also leads me to another point that we tend to believe only a certain type of in the binary spectrum can be is only a bad dominant or is only a good submissive versus if we look at it another way. And we talked about this before. I'd mentioned to you in a part of the world, um, there is there is a female dominant that has rampant consent violations, is expounding predatory behavior, and her own community is protecting it. But if this was a male dominant, chastised, outed, consent violations up the wazoo. There'd be reports. Everybody would be coming out, but no one's coming out. No one's speaking out about it because this particular person has a very loud voice. My voice is a lot louder. I don't really care. They're dangerous to me. But we're changing the binary bias here inside of a power dynamic, and it is a pivotal aspect because when we look at this lifestyle, we do look at it in binary terms, regardless if that's right or wrong. It is how it is. That's how we look at it. If there is a male or a female inside of a power role, if they are the dominant or they are the top, we look at women who are in charge, and they're either what is the typical bias that comes out, right? Here comes the bias part. They're either a fendom, they have to be sadistic because they have to exert more control or authority, or they are only looking for pay pigs. Well, I know it's another aspect of it's not even really an aspect of financial domination, but you know, there isn't we're excluding the context of the carer here. We're excluding the context of a sensual female dominant. Where in quite contrast, we're also look at people who are, when we look at the dominant side for males, we're looking at they're hard, they're rigid, they deliver more power. I've known sadistic female tops that deliver more sadistic, deeper, fulfilling sadistic scenes than I can ever create. So I think there is a lot of bias on all sides of the platform.
I think bias is enormous, and I think bias, when we start to talk about consent, I agree with everything that you said about bias, and I think it's one of those topics that we could talk about for days. But I think bias, and this binary idea of good and bad and black and white and kink is restrictive, and I think we've got to check our biases a lot. And especially when we start to deal with the accountability side of kink, and decide how much bias we have in a situation, whether we really have a factual voice in answering the question, or we have an emotional reaction in answering the situation. And I see it in a lot of the consent incidences. And I think that the more we can look at our own binary bias in a situation, um, unfortunately, my examples today are very, we're in 16 days of activism for gender-based violence. And having been through rape myself and having been raped, I have bias against rapists and against men who abuse women. So for me to be on a board in a situation for accountability, I can't handle something without bias if there has been rape between a cishet man and a woman. I would step down and I would remove myself from the situation. I have too much bias in the situation to deal with it unemotionally and to give a factual answer. So that would be my take on bias today after my week. But um, I agree with you, and I think bias overclouds our judgment and often makes our actions reactionary instead of ethical. And I think that we need to be careful about how it plays out in our community scenes on a huge level. And then also how it affects our relationships, and our relationships not just with people, but with kinks and with other things as well. Um, yeah, it's a minefield and it's huge.
Well, I think there's always going to be these dynamics as they play out. From a broader perspective here, if we embrace this notion of power, that power dynamics exist on a spectrum, right? It allows for a more nuanced understanding, and it really does emphasize that consensual power exchange isn't just confined to a simplistic binary. Instead, it really evolves within the boundaries set by those who are involved in that dynamic in the first place. And through this acknowledgement, it becomes quite liberating, and it offers the participants the freedom to explore and express their power dynamics authentically. And it really does break free from a societal expectation here where people can engage in power dynamics that align with the desires and values. Maybe it's why we're seeing a rise in switch type behavior, for example, or people that are aligning more into to a traditional role. Either way, this shift fosters this environment where relationships aren't just constrained by preconceived notions. They promote this healthier dynamic based on a mutual understanding and exploration that their roles don't have to be confined to just one area.
Yeah, I love that. When I came into this community and when I joined FET as a platform, it was cool to be a submissive. So I was like, okay, we'll try that. But I had no idea what it meant. It wasn't cool to be exploring. Like all the cool kids had a label and had a role and had a title for the mighty at that point. And I also wanted to be mighty. I didn't want to be little and lost on a platform, so I just chose something. Very quickly discovered that I'm about as submissive as a cactus, and that really doesn't work for me. And lucky enough, I have enough, bravery to sort of stand up and go, well, okay, we'll try something else. But I think a lot of people don't, because they are set on the ideals that are set by somebody else. And I think the one thing that's amazing in kink, is that you can be anything you want to be. Like, there are no rules here. This is literally kink. I see that there is a new role on FetLife. It's raccoon with a small r. A small r is important here. So I mean, like, literally, if we've got to a point where you can be a raccoon with a small r, you can be anything you want to be. Like, there is no limit to this.
It,
So,
it, it does frustrate me on some things.
I
It
love it.
just
I
it
think it's
just drives
fabulous.
me friggin' insane. Next, I mean, I've seen Chaos Gremlin. What the
I
what
could
does that
be a.
even mean?
See, I'm gonna try that for 2024. I'm gonna be a chaos gremlin for
Oh
2024,
man,
and I'll go
you're
back
gonna
to
do
you.
that just to drive me nuts.
Yep.
I know it.
Yep.
I mean, I see these things, and I know they're supposed to be reflectant on our personality, but we have to also understand that they are an indicator. We are also using these things to describe as a first impression to others. Um, I don't
I
do
just,
brats, so I see a brat, I shy away. They could be end up being the nicest, most intelligent, most beautiful, energetic, artistic person in the world. You put brat in there, I'm gone. I don't even bother looking.
yeah,
Nothing
and
you can say to me brings me back.
I think that's such a valid point, and I think what I see in the incidences that happen in my own community a lot of the time is people pick these roles. Submissive is one of them. Another great one that's probably not a good idea to choose if you're new in the community and you don't know what you're doing is fuck doll. Like, there are a couple of them that, like, really don't pick it. Like,
Cum
exploring.
dumpster,
He
slut
comes on
bag.
to, there we
Yeah.
go.
I'm
Yeah,
going to have to
yeah.
so make this show explicit when I put this on Spotify
You
later today.
probably are going to, and I'm sorry.
No,
I
no, no. That's
apologize.
quite okay. I've said worse before, and that's part.
So,
It's an open discussion for adults.
but
That's the reality.
the reality is, and the reality is, if you go onto my profile and you see sadomasochist, and then you look at my pictures, but you see sadomasochist, you don't automatically think that I'm going to bend over for you, or that I'm into anal, or that I am, like, those are not the first things that come to your mind when you look at my profile. And I think that what we put out there is what we're going to receive back. Culture creates culture. So if you're creating the culture that you're a fuckdoll, and that's what you're looking for, um, those are the messages you're going to get in your inbox, and that's the feedback you're going to get. And then you're going to feel like you're being constantly violated because people are asking to fuck you. But that's literally what you're looking for. So I think we got to be a little bit careful about putting the message out to somebody that, you know, this is the role that we're playing, and
Yeah.
show up a little bit more ethically, show up with a little bit more of, like, this is who I am, these are my vanilla interests, this is who I am as a person, this is how my journey's developed, and I think that goes a long way, to taking to not identifying people as roles or using titles for the mighty. Like, I love to play mistress, but I am a sadomasochist. I'm not a mistress. I love to be a kitten, but I'm a sadomasochist, not a kitten. So, like these are all the things that I can be, but at the end of the day, I'm B. I'm a human. I'm an ethical human being first before I'm any of those things. So that's what people have got to get to know when they reach out to my Fed profile, and know that I'm a tangible person that they can communicate with, and that I'm reasonable, and that I'm like, I only bite and stick pins in you if you pay me. Like, yeah, I'm joking. You don't have to pay me. I'll do it for free, Chris. This is between us. So I'll do it for free. Yeah, I think it's really.
I'll
I think
send you a bill for my hourly rate.
you said yes. That was consent. I'm going with that. You ready for a good time? Yes, let's go. Um, yeah, I just think, and I think the power dynamic and everything is half the reason why consent gets blown out of the water. Because if you take that foundation of autonomy, where you've got this vine of power, I'm going back to my beautiful little house, and this vine of power is creeping up my house. It's covering everything, and its roots digging into my foundation, and its roots wearing away my foundation. So I stop negotiating as B, and I start negotiating as kitten, who is nonverbal and who can't talk and is really crap at negotiating. And I'm not setting myself up for success here, and I'm not setting my partner up for success, because by me using a no and setting my boundaries and providing that, I'm providing my partner with information. That's fucking cool shit. Like, the more information you have on people, that's like, information is a resource. Like, you can use that to tailor things and to make stuff better and to both get what you want. Like, information is the coolest stuff. A no is not a bad thing. Like,
No.
everybody hears a no and thinks, oh my God, they said no to me. A no is so cool because you've now ticked one thing off the list that you're not going to do again. Like, you know that you're not going to go there. It's not a diss on you as a person. It's actually got nothing to do with you. It's just a little bit of information that that person's provided. So the more we can, the more we can get away from. Oh, I got a bit lost. The more we can get away. Nope, I got lost. You're gonna have to help me.
I can hear you.
No, I got lost in my head. Sorry.
Oh.
I got lost. I was on a track and then I thought of something else and I got lost. Just bring me back.
Well, I mean, you're talking. Well, initially we were starting to talk about binary bias, and then you went back to
Power.
power, and then we got back into autonomy.
So,
So,
so yeah, so this power dynamic erodes your autonomy. It completely, you cannot negotiate from that point of view. You cannot be consenting from that point of view. And if you find in the relationship that the power dynamic is overriding your foundation and overriding your autonomy, you don't have the capacity to consent. This relationship is toxic. What's happening from then on is not a good idea. You need to take a step back and you need to go back to being two regular humans, and you need to spend a little self-reflection on deciding again, what are your boundaries, what are your limits, where are you going with this, what do you really want out of the interaction, and then putting it back into play in your cubic depth of container, and having a communication session before you continue. Because if you don't do that, that is when you get that answer like that you had from that girl, which is heartbreaking to hear from both a top and a bottom, where somebody says, I did it because I thought you wanted it, because I thought that's what you expected, and I lied to you, I wasn't ready. Like, that's heartbreaking. As a top, that absolutely shatters my heart, because for you to be put in that situation as another top, it's just totally unfair. And for somebody to put themselves in a situation where they're facing harm that they don't want, we're not crazy. We sadists. We love giving pain to people who love experiencing pain, and
absolutely.
that ticks all my fucking boxes. That makes me wet as hell. When you tell me that you didn't really want the pain, I feel like an absolute asshole, and it's as dry as a desert down there, and it's going to be for the next 6 months, and we're not going to play together again. So I think that, being able to have a voice in a situation like that for me is a sign that there's no autonomy in the situation. She didn't have the right to feel the right to use her voice, and those aren't the players I want to play with. You
Well,
don't make
no,
magic.
and we could even go a step further here. She removed some of the power of my authority.
100%. 100%. For me, it's a violation against you because she didn't give you the choice not to play with her.
Correct.
And that
100%.
and that for me, that's starting to break this down onto ethical, my ethical boundaries are: when you lie to me, you take the choice away from me. When you take drugs and you don't tell me, you take the choice away from me. These are actions that these are my absolute boundaries and limits, and where I can't go in a situation, because then you've made this unethical for me. Then you've made my choices unethical when I've carefully thought about them. And trust me, I've got 95 spreadsheets. I've thought very carefully about my choices in the
No,
situation.
I do understand. Look, what I'm going to do here is, I want to say thank you for coming today. I know we can keep going, and it's late for you. I've got to get my day going. I'm gonna try to get you in before the end of the year, so we can get both parts 1 and 2 out before the end of this year, if
Fab.
possible. And I'll work on this with you privately. Next time when we come back, I want to really get into this, the vine of power in human relationships, which is a really good segue from where we're leaving off. So thank you again for spending your this little bit of time with me and sharing your views of the world.
Chris, I had an amazing evening, and I'm so glad you agreed to do needles with me. I'm taking that as a keepsake from tonight. And anybody that wants to follow me, I love followers on my page on Fit. I love it even more if you follow me on my porn site and you buy my porn. but you don't have to. And I'd love to come back and chat to you a little bit more. Thank you for making time for me, and I hope you have an amazing day. I'm going to go and have very sweet dreams about sticking needles in some guy who lives in New Zealand. Don't know where that came from.
Yeah, well, there are crazy people all over the world. Well, with that said, everybody, I hope you enjoyed today's discussion. This is at least part one. We'll be back definitely with part two. If you are listening to me on Spotify for the first time, please like, subscribe, follow along, yada, yada, yada. Please rate the show 5 stars. I really, it helps me keep the show free for now and allows others to find it. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.